passing by. Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss again here at allpointstv.com. John just gave us the signal to start, and that's like a command when he does his finger and wave his finger at us. I think it's wagging his finger in our face. But when he does that, we have to get started. We're glad to have you with us this afternoon. We're coming to you at on the anniversary of Dr. King's birthday. Celebrate the third Monday of each January, normalized and made into a national holiday by the Reagan administration in 1983, and the celebration began in 1986, and we've been off and running with that celebration ever since. And the holiday gets bigger and bigger every year, and hope you are doing something special on this occasion. We can all stand a little bit more peace in our lives and in our community and in our country and the world, and we hope you are doing your part to make things more peaceful where you are. I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about another expression of Dr. King that may not get the airwaves coverage today on all of the alphabet soup, CNN, Fox, and so on, who will no doubt cover the King anniversary, but probably will not be saying the things we'll be saying here. I want to go back to the last 2 days of Dr. King's life on April the 3rd, and the speech he gave, which has been chronicled as the mountaintop speech that he gave at a church the night before he was killed, and talk about what was going on there in Memphis, which had brought him back into the city that Dr. King came back into on the 3rd of April. He had been there a few days the month before and had left out after there was an altercation that occurred, and a march was trying to lead, but did not know that the march had been infiltrated by a group called the Invaders. And that group, by the way, had been infiltrated by the FBI in its counterintelligence program, where they were infiltrating groups, not all of them black groups, but groups considered radical or challenging the status quo. And they had infiltrated the Invaders, which was a gang in Memphis, and it was that group, while King was leading a march on March 29th, that while he's in the forefront of the demonstrators, in the rear, the Invaders group had come into the demonstration, had infiltrated it, and some of the agents inside their group that infiltrated the Invaders instigated an incident. They started breaking out windows, and of course looting occurred, and then chaos ensued. All of a sudden, King is made aware of the outbreak of violence, and someone waves a car down and tell them that Dr. King is out there in the street and he needs to get away from the altercation. And they gave King a ride, and he was able to ride away from the melee that was going on at that time. But by having demonstrated, and the demonstration coming into a violent mode, it put nonviolence on trial, and the question was whether or not Dr. King could any longer lead a nonviolent movement for which he had been known ever since the demonstrations that occurred in Memphis, Tennessee, going back through that to Albany, Georgia in 1962, and before that to Montgomery, the bus boycott that occurred there in 1955, as you know, when Rosa Parks refused to give up a seat on the bus, not because she was sitting behind the bus driver, but because she was sitting in the area assigned to the blacks on that bus, and they were asking her to give up that seat, and Rosa Parks, realizing that she was within the corridors of the law, the boundaries were such that the seating arrangement was that blacks would sit behind what was assigned on those buses. And she had in fact complied with the law, but then when the bus filled up, they wanted her to move from that seat. And of course, history changes. After you write history, you edify the behavior a little bit more than what really the history indicates. And they edified what Rosa Parks did by putting her eventually, but every year since 1955, they have, in a sense, moved Rosa Parks up one seat. And as I have said before, there really are no seats left. They had to put Rosa Parks behind the bus driver, and that's not true. So the only thing left as we go forward, if they're going to continue this fantasy that they created in the historical record, substituting the fantasy for the history, is that you have to put her behind the wheel of the bus and make Rosa Parks the bus driver. But that's what happens. You know, when you have history being written, then history is a fable, isn't it? It's what Napoleon said. History is a fable agreed upon. And if you get enough people to believe it, then the fable becomes history, and then history can take a back seat to the fable. And that's what happened. That's what's happened in a lot of ways with the civil rights movement, because we no longer are celebrating so much Dr. King on this day as we are celebrating the image we put up there in the aftermath of King's life, and we're celebrating the mythical aspects of King's life rather than going back and draining the swamp of history and then putting the real historical record in its place, which we have to do some reading in order to do that, to capture the history that's there in the annals of history, and not this creation that comes through the media's spin on what this movement was all about. But the 2 days, really one day before King was assassinated, we see that Dr. King, this was the 29th of March, by the way, when Dr. King had been called into the city by some of the city fathers that wanted him to come in and give some of the civil rights cover to what really was if you look at it from a technical standpoint, it really was a bargaining issue where you had garbage workers that were trying to unionize. They were trying to get more pay. The average garbage worker at that time in the city were getting about the height of the pay was about $70 a week. And they were trying to increase their pay, which is really, if you're in a union, it really is a bargaining unit between the union and the managers. But they turned it into a civil rights issue because the 1,300 garbage workers in Memphis, they were, and in other, cities as well in Tennessee, but in Memphis, those garbage workers were being treated unfairly in terms of, for example, if it rained, they would send the garbage workers home, and the supervisors remained on the job and they got paid for the day, but the ones they sent home did not get paid. They had gone on their jobs, got sent back home, no pay and no compensation for the time they had arrived on the job, and then were sent back home. And that was a grievance they had in terms of the working conditions. So they're out on strike, and Dr. King was called in as a way of putting pressure on the bargainers to treat the garbage workers fairly, because they did not have, being at the lower end of the totem pole, having real clout. And then let's understand another aspect of it. Dr. King had pretty much lost his mojo in the aftermath of the Civil Rights Bill that had been passed in 1964 and the Voting Rights Act that had been passed the following year in 1965. And a lot of the mojo of the Civil Rights Movement was taken out of it, because what King was actually demonstrating about and what they were really fighting over in the South was the right of those blacks to go to the polls and exercise their right to choose their representatives in what was alleged to be a guaranteed Republican form of government in Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution. And Dr. King was, in fact, trying to perfect that right that was guaranteed in the Constitution. And you hear that in King's voice. You hear it in his speeches. That I have a dream, he said on August 28, 1963, he said, I have a dream, and it's deeply rooted in the American dream. And he was quoting from the document, the Declaration of Independence, which then overlapped into the language in the Constitution of the United States. And Dr. King was talking about having a dream, not outside of the context of the American dream, but based upon the American dream. And he was trying to bring about a more perfected union, which we all are trying to do that, hopefully, and we all have a vested interest in doing it. Not just King's work, it's all of our work. And it's particularly our work right now, 52 years after Dr. King was struck down on the balcony of the Lorraine Hotel. I mean, we have to continue this work. And every generation is called upon to do it, because freedom is not free and is never guaranteed from one generation to another. Every generation is called upon in its own time to defend freedom, because freedom is never guaranteed to any generation, particularly the one that precedes the one that drops the ball. Because we drop the ball, we cannot pass it on to our children. But 2 days, King came in to Memphis on the 29th of March, and they were leading a demonstration because King was always putting people in the street, as well putting pressure upon the city. And by putting that pressure upon the city, it also behooved the city then to calm things down, because the more people are in the streets, the more control you lose in terms of controlling the rest of the population. Because what will happen is, in terms of demonstrations, those that are not involved in it over a period of time will see the need to get involved over time, because they see that something is going on here. And then the chain effect of it is that more people will in fact begin to embrace it, and they'll begin to spiral out of control. So it put a lot of people out there, and they're trying to, Dr. King's putting a lot of pressure on the city, and also on the city resources, because you have to have officers there. You have to maintain the peace and welfare of the community. And there are people on both sides hollering and egging the situation on. Creates a lot of problems. And one thing about politicians, they always want to have calmness, because calmness is an indication that they're doing their job, and that everyone is pleased as punch in the job they're doing. Because if they were not satisfied, and were in fact dissatisfied, they'd be out there in the street. And being in the street shows there's some dissatisfaction with the people downtown. And they can't have that, because they are doing a good job, right? And they want to be reelected. So calmness is the word. And we can't have people out there demonstrating, because part of that demonstration is against the city fathers, who are supposed to maintain calmness. So King comes in, and he doesn't know that the invaders have been infiltrated, but they've been infiltrated under the COINTELPRO. And they infiltrated some of the radical groups. The Weathermen had agents in it. The Black Panther Party. Go read about that history. Go read Elaine Brown's book that talks about the same person that Ann Coulter was talking about during the time in which they were celebrating Kwanzaa, a person by the name of Maulana Karenga. And she was talking about how Kwanzaa is brought to you by the FBI agent, and she called Maulana Karenga, Ron Karenga, formerly Ron Everett, out on his, let's say this without, let me see if we can think of a document that would document this, because it's not just Ann Coulter, that documents that this was also the one that was over the group called US, United Slaves. And they were riding around in California, driving Cadillacs, because what they were doing was pitting these groups against each other. And the group called United Slaves, which was set up by Ron Everett, later on Ron Karenga, later on Maulana Karenga, the one that will eventually hoist Kwanzaa upon the country, was no question about having some ties, according to the documentation, with the counterintelligence program, and we can tell that, but not only by Elaine Brown's book, Elaine Brown's book called A Taste of Power, but also you could read the book, I think on page 90 of this book, written by Louis Tackwood, and that book is called The Glass House Tapes. I suggest you read that, because Louis Tackwood makes a claim that he was the one that was paying the money to Karenga, who is now the most militant person that's out there. But let's go back and look at the man's history and how they pitted these groups against each other, which he would later on write about. And he would write about the dangerous games played by your friendly police department. Not so friendly sometimes. But in this case here in Memphis, you see the infiltration. And that infiltration was such that they had already decided upon there would not be a peaceful march, because this is a time to, in fact, decry the continued energy of the civil rights movement. And reason why that was going on was because the civil rights movement, although King was pledged to nonviolence, it never was a nonviolent movement in the sense of the results of the movement. If you look at Dr. King, wherever Dr. King was, there was always an outbreak of violence. And in fact, John F. Kennedy said to him in one of their meetings, he said, "You all should thank Bull Connor for helping to energize the civil rights movement." And Dr. King took some exception to that and said, "What? Want to know what John F. Kennedy was talking about?" And he said, "Because without Bull Connor, the movement would not have had the steam that it had in order to get these things done and bills passed, which Kennedy was trying to pass, never was able to do it. But Johnson, who succeeded John F. Kennedy, was able to use the energy of the movement and the martyrdom of John F. Kennedy, martyred in Dallas, November the 22nd, 1963, was able to use that energy and then push the agenda of the civil rights movement. And of course, all the credit that should have gone to the Republican Party went to the Democratic Party because the myth is that Johnson, who signed the bill into law, it wasn't that Johnson had written the law. Presidents don't write laws. The law is written by the Congress, and the ones in Congress are the Republicans. Johnson just signs the bill, but he's the one that's visible, and he gets all the credit for having brought it about, takes the bow, brings King into the Oval Office, and they have the civil rights leaders up there, signing the civil rights bill. The public gets its information from CBS, ABC, and NBC. You don't have the cable news at this point. And so they get their news from Walter Cronkite, and they think, and here's Walter Cronkite telling them that in that baritone voice, and that's the way it is. And people think that's the way it is. And they didn't see behind the scenes what was going on, and they didn't see the okie doke that's being played on the public by having this call celebrate in public and having people sign in front of the cameras. And people thought Johnson was the one that initiated it. So here's the part of the Ku Klux Klan. I know people are not going to like me saying this one. And here was a party of the Ku Klux Klan out here in the forefront signing the civil rights bill, which they were out there in the street that was demonstrating against the party of the Klan, that people think this is really where they have made it generic to whites in the South. I'm from the South, and I will tell you something. I was raised there. 17 years of my life was, my first 17 years was spent in Birmingham, where Bull Connor was. And if anybody thinks that this was the South doing that and not those Democrats in the South, get the memo. Because this was not the South, this was the politicians in the South, and these were the Democrats in the South. And you can claim whatever you want. One guy was writing on Facebook, as a matter of fact, saying that all of the Democrats who were the racists in the South back in the time of Jim Crow, discrimination, segregation, separate but equal, Plessy versus Ferguson. They were saying during that time, in the aftermath of that in the 60s, all of the Democrats, now here they just packed their bags up, and they went over and joined the Republican Party, and they had vacated the party of the Klan. They were no longer Klansmen. They were over here in the Republican Party. You can believe that fantasy if you want to. But I have the documents to disprove that narrative. That narrative is totally false. And that's not just in reading. You can go and watch these great videos, these films been made by the great conservative videographer, Dinesh D'Souza. Ever heard of him? Go look at his films that are in, what is it called, Netflix? Go watch his films and listen to some of the conversations he's had on this movement as he interviews this former professor at Vanderbilt University. I think they ran out of there. But she's featured in there, and they're talking about this notion of all these Democrats supposedly got tired of the lynch mob that they represented in the Democratic Party, and so they just simply vacated their racial polemics and premises and ran in and became Republicans, and that was exactly what they said occurred. So the Democrats are purged of their racism. Of course, that's what black people want to believe because they don't want to give up their victimhood. They want, you see, black people do not want to give up their victimhood. They want to complain about it. And so to justify that 90% of them are following in the footsteps of John Lewis and others like that, the whole Congressional Caucasian Black Caucus, all of them are Democrats. So following in the footsteps of their Klan, agents, they don't want to give that up because there's a power center inside of the Democratic Party. So they're alleging that all of the racists were purged out of the Democratic Party and they went and joined the Republican Party. That's where they are now. Every last one of his house here. Donald Trump is a racist. Everyone underneath him is racist. All the Republicans are racist. And that was what Kamala Harris was saying, wasn't it, in terms when she said to Joe Biden, after accusing him of racism, but he's a Democrat, so you could not allege that and then keep the narrative going. So she says at the very beginning of her attack of him for a racial polemic in terms of his stand against busing at that time, she said, now I don't think you're a racist, because she had to deny that in order to make the other allegations stick. And that was that I don't think you're a racist. To deny this, she was making a racial allegation, but she was making a racial allegation against Joe Biden. Not supposed to do that, because it's supposed to be monolithic in one group, it's purged in the other group, no longer over there. All of them are no longer there. They've been purged, and they ran into the Republican Party, where they've been embraced by whom? Nobody. It's all part of history, is a fable agreed upon. And we agree upon the fable that Donald Trump is now holding the banner of racism. Of course, he only held it when he ran for president. Before that, everybody loved the man. And that includes Jesse Jackson, the incredibly ignorant Al Sharpton, and other lesser figures that are charlatans, but no less dangerous than Sharpton, who continue to feed this racial narrative that the country is racially out of control. It was at one time racially out of control, but that's when the Democrats were the ones that were actually running the racial narrative in this country. And they are, to a large extent, still running it, but from another standpoint. They're the ones making the racial allegations, such as Jesse Millett and others. And so they're still running the narrative, but the narrative is now that the country is racist and so on and so forth. But you have these narratives being made up in order to prove the narrative, and you have to prove it by, in fact, making up incidents that are not racial incidents, but turning them into racial incidents because blacks and whites are involved in it, and making it into a racial allegation. But racism stopped being a problem in this country, quite frankly, when the Democrats were forced through the civil rights bills of 1964 and 65 to stop their discriminatory conduct, at least overtly, because blacks were able to obtain the right to vote. And it made the Democrats begin to sound differently than they were sounding prior to 1964 with the Civil Rights Act passed in that year, and also in 1965 when you had the, okay, thanks, John, when you had the Voting Rights Act passed the following year. And of course, the voting rights is what made people begin to change their tune, because when you're disenfranchised, you cannot speak into the political process because they only listen to those who have some voice in that process. And if you don't have a voice, then you don't count. Okay, we're told that we're taking a break right now from WFOV, and we're glad that you are good about coming back after 4 minutes after your hiatus is over, and we'll see you on the other side of the break. We're going to continue what we're saying here, though, and that is that Dr. King is at the end of his life here. He doesn't know this, but he's at the very end, has one more day left when he goes back into Memphis. I wrote an article today on Facebook. So those of you on Facebook can get the article that I wrote this morning. And one person who commented on it said the D word, and then put a heart by it, said darn. It wasn't darn's other word. And because I was pointing out some things that are not necessarily in the purview of the public, because they don't put this on television. In terms of the real Dr. King, they put a fantasy in the place of King, one who was dreaming. You know, I have a dream, which is very different from someone saying that I have a plan. We all have dreams. But if you don't have a plan, then it's just a dream then. Dr. King had a dream. On 3 occasions, he talked about his dream. But Dr. King had a plan to affect the dream, and that was to indict the country, implicate the country in its own assessment of itself. Because we have the document that says we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and of course all women, that they are endowed with certain inalienable rights you're born with. And then to itemize those rights, as it does in the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, it says that among these rights, and there are 3 in number, the right to abortion, right? No, the right to life. There's no right to eliminate life in this country. And I don't care what those members on the Supreme Court said. The documents are very clear. The right to life, the right to liberty, and the right to pursue your own happiness. Not guaranteed, because you may fail in the proposition, but the right to pursue it based upon the merits of those that are in pursuit of their happiness. But it has to be affected by the individual, not by government. I was having that discussion with my wife today, and she was complaining because we're getting so many robocalls, and the phone is ringing, and The person that's calling is not available, and my wife is upset because she's getting all these calls all day long, and so she wants to have the government intervene. And okay, I'm glad that I just saw where WFOV came back, so thank you for coming back. And we're not very far away from where we were when you left, so we're around the same area, haven't gone too far astray. I was talking about my wife who was telling me this morning about the phone ringing all the time, and the person on the other end are trying to sell her something, and my wife is mad because she has to go in there and find out it's robocall or somebody's on the other line that didn't identify themselves, and they're trying to sell us something, and we don't want to buy anything. If we want to buy it, we can look in ads and pick out, what our needs are and what we want to purchase, what our desires are in terms of adding to what we already have. We don't buy a lot of things in terms of putting ornaments in the house. Anything I seem like my son brings over, he thinks I need, he brings over there. But she was talking about she wants to see the government do something about it. And in terms of, we're tired of these people calling. They're always making these phone calls and phone rings all day. And my point was that we don't need the government to come in here and stop the phone from ringing. We have I don't know if you have it in your house, but in our house we have a code that comes up on the phone and tells us who's on the other end. And you have another on the side of the phone, there's a regulator of the sound. And once you find out it's a call that you don't want to take, just turn the sound down. You don't need the government to come in there and turn it down in your house or to stop it from entering your house. Because freedom is not free, and these people want you to believe that government is the answer to all the problems in society. And I hate to break it to you, the government is not a solution to any of our problems. Because every solution to our problems comes with a cost to liberty. We need to get government to back off. So I don't know if I was convincing or not. But I get those phone calls when my wife is gone. I get the phone calls too. If I look over there and see unavailable, as far as I'm concerned, they spoke for me. I don't know how they knew it. Because if you have not identified yourself as a caller and you put there unavailable, you've announced to me my own standing in the phone call, because I'm unavailable if it says that on that answering device. That's how I know I'm not available, because I'm only available to people that call me that I know something about. If my friends are not calling me, I don't have anything to say on the phone. Or some business entity that's calling me, I don't know why they'd be calling. I'm not spending any money with them, as tight as I am. So when they call, and I look down there, and it's a service that I know I did not ask for, and there's no reason for them to be calling me because I have the services that I need, I turn the sound down. That solves that problem. I don't need to have the government come in and solve it. There are some problems, I understand the nanny state, but there are a lot of these problems we can solve ourselves. And we need to stop inviting government into our household, into our lives, into our personal space. And I'm trying to teach that in my own house. Because I don't want government intruding into our space. I want to have the government in its own space. And its own space is in the corridors of power assigned to it under the United States Constitution. Have you heard of that document? King was saying that he had a dream. And he said it was deeply rooted in the American dream. And he's talking about the fabric of the nation underneath its own documents. And those documents are the Declaration of Independence in 1776 And the Constitution, this brilliant document that I keep on writing about on Facebook, and I think I've convinced a lot of people, even this one person that challenges me every time I write something, because he said to me, as a matter of fact, yesterday, asked me, what is the purpose of the Constitution if your claim is that you're the only one that understands it? I hate to tell you this. I don't back off from that. I am the only one that understands it. You can say what you want to. Listen to these jokers out there. Alan Dershowitz. You see, they know I'm out here because I'm too public with my calling them out. I'm calling them out. And I notice there's no counterpunching that going on. You know why? Because they know what time it is. That's why. They're not going to say anything. Because what they're doing is mocking the document. There's a video right now on YouTube that shows Alan Dershowitz saying the opposite in 1998 when they were impeaching Bill Clinton. They're saying right now is a flip of his own comment, although they misappropriated what he was saying. But there is a difference in how Dershowitz saw the issue in 1998 and how he sees it right now in 2020, because they're inconsistent. But the language hasn't changed. And the mere fact that what they're saying about it has changed show you that they do not have a grounding in the Constitution, because that document is not being amended by them coming out and speaking against it in terms of what it says. And just because they say what it says doesn't mean what it says. I can go and read it for myself. And I read it better than they do. And that's why I keep daring you. I hope they I hope they come out there, because if they come out there, then it's gonna be on. They ain't gonna get out there. And I'm talking about Lawrence Tribe at Harvard University. I'm talking about Noah Feldman. He's also over there. And that increasingly becoming a football and basketball school, a basketball and football university, like the rest of them. And that includes this emeritus professor from Harvard University. Alan Dershowitz is emeritus professor at Harvard University. He's not gonna get out there either. He better not. Or it's gonna be embarrassing. I'm not telling you what I hope, and I'm not telling you what I believe. I'm telling you what I know. He better not get out there on my wall saying what he's saying on Fox Network. And what they're saying about the king today, they better not get on my wall. Because history may well be a fable agreed upon, but I don't agree upon it. I don't have to. And this fable they agree upon is because all of the synoptic scholars, the ones that have a seeing eye, where they collude. You see, that's collusion among the scholars. You didn't know that, did you? But what do you think they're talking about when you call them parrots? They are colluding. That's why they apologize when they disagree with each other in public. You saw that when they brought Feldman from Harvard. They brought Jeffrey Toobin from George Washington University. They brought a scholar from Stanford and one from UNC, the University of North Carolina, and brought them in there to testify before one of these illicit committees in the House, and brought them in there. And when they disagree with each other, they were apologizing to each other, because you're not supposed to do that in public, because there's supposed to be unanimity among the scholars of what the document they're quoting says, and if they disagree, then somebody got to be wrong. And you can't have them being scholars when they disagree about the document, because the document says the same thing no matter who's reading it. So you can see them almost falling over each other in their apology and so on and so forth. But I don't give them any credit for it unless they're telling me what the document says. And I have read the document for myself and read it before they became scholars over the document, because I read those documents in high school in Mr. Vaughn's class. And so I started a little bit earlier than they did. And I suggest also, since they're quoting, they used to quote Federalist Paper 65. You know, 2 Federalist Papers deal with impeachment. Both of them written by Hamilton. Hamilton wrote 51 of the Federalist Papers. And so they were quoting 65 to a large extent. And then all of a sudden, when the members of Congress were trying to rein the president in and trying to undergird and really undermine his Article 2 executive powers, they went and started quoting Federalist Paper 69, and they were trying to say that, and this was the guy down in Florida. He's pretty much on the president's side. Getz, his name is Getz, Representative Getz. And he's pretty much on the president's side, but when the president went over there and killed this terrorist, you know, they got all bent out of shape. Can't do that. We didn't come to Congress and ask us. Now here's a man lined up in the line of fire, and these crazy people think you're supposed to go and call up Congress and get all the ones that are going to tell the press. The press then puts them in the paper, and then the man is now informed by these leakers, the New York Times and the Washington Post and the rest of them, the Los Angeles Times, and don't forget CNN and MSNBC. They can't stand as president, and they go out there and feed it to them, and then the person caught in the crossfire is out of the line of fire, and he gets away because he had to call up all these people and tell them he's getting ready to exercise a duty and a privilege that he has as the commander-in-chief. And they were saying, well, in Federalist Paper 69, it's Federalist Paper 69 now. In Federalist Paper 69, I knew it very well. And they were saying that in Federalist Paper 69, John, did we have that?
No, I was on the phone.
Okay, that's all right.
Yeah,
that's okay. I can tell you what's in it. In Federalist Paper 69, in the 6th paragraph, it talks about.
I got it up, by the way.
You have it up now?
I got it
up. Oh,
yeah.
Good. Okay, you can see here the relevant paragraphs in Federalist Paper 69. Look at the 4th paragraph and the 6th paragraph. Now, you can see it on the screen. I can't see it on the screen. I'm just telling you what's in there. The 4th and 6th paragraphs deal with the 2 major issues that they're talking about right now. One is impeachment, and then one has to do with the Article 2 authority of the president. Now, when they're confused, these are members of the Congress, by the way, just as confused as anyone else, because they don't understand the Constitution either. And in the Federalist Paper, it says that the powers of the president are different from the powers of the King of England, and they're trying to show that the president's authority is not the same as the authority of the king, because they had been fighting against the king to get from underneath his thumb, really underneath his boot. And so they're trying to show that it would not be the same if they, in fact, would endorse the Constitution. And this is written in order to change the minds of those in New York, because New York only sent one representative to the Constitution Convention, and that person was Alexander Hamilton. And they want to make sure that they convince New York, a critical state. If it doesn't endorse it, the whole thing probably falls apart. And they're trying to convince New York there's no threat here. And they're showing that there's a difference in terms of the war-making power of the president and that of the king, which encompasses, in the king's case, both the right to declare war, where in the president doesn't have the right to declare war. And here these people running off thinking what that means is, therefore, the president cannot engage in war. Let me tell you something. I don't want to get too profane here. Let me see how I can say this. You have to be a darn fool not to understand what that language is about. That language is about the formalization of the call. You see, because it would not be inherent in the legislative branch to do that, because they are a body that, in fact, makes the law. The president then enforces the law, but because it's outside of their orbit to be involved in orchestrating anything to do with the military, which is, of course, assigned to the president's commander-in-chief, then what they did was formalize the declaration of war and place it in the hands of the Congress in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11. But it does not mean because it's been formalized in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11, that it's taken away from the president, who has the inherent power. Listen to that very carefully. The power is inherent in the presidency. Why? It's inherent in the power of the president, but not formalized. It's formalized in the Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11 for the Congress. It does not have to be formalized in the president. Why? Because the president doesn't declare war. But it does not deny the president the non-formalization of making war. And that's the difference there, which they don't get. You know why they don't get it? Because they are not in that room where those intellectuals are. And the biggest problem we have right now, by the way, is that we have scholars trying to interpret what intellectuals wrote. It takes intellectuals to understand what they wrote. And that's what I'm fighting with this one guy that gets on my posts all the time, only to argue with me, but he's not qualified to argue with me about what I'm saying about the Constitution. He thinks he is. And the last thing they were arguing with me about on Facebook was my statement that there's no ambiguity in the Constitution considering the Article 2, Section 1, Clause 5 powers. In other words, that which bequeaths upon the incumbent president or even the office holder that aspires to be president, it tells the president or the president-to-be what are the particulars of holding the highest office in the country. And the first one is that you must be a natural-born citizen. And they're saying that it does not, a lot of people are saying this, all the scholars are saying it, there does not, in fact, bequeath to the country the clarity of what that means. It does bequeath to the country the clarity of what that means. They just can't read it. And I suggest to go back and read Article 2, Section 1, Clause 5 again, because it does clarify it. But if you are not literate in the language that's being used by these scholars, these intellectuals, and you're just a mere scholar and not an intellectual, then you will not understand what the intellectuals were written because you're not on that level. And none of these people are on that level. That's why they don't understand it. We can take it down now, but I just want you to see here that that's in the 6th and 9th Federalist paper. King was trying to do some of that work. Not that King was necessarily coherent. That was not his calling. He was a person that was answering a moral call. You know, the idea of speaking to the morality of the constitutional mandates, trying to perfect it from a moral standpoint. We hold these truths to be self-evident, quoting from what Jefferson had written, and quoting from what Madison, Hamilton, and Jay, had written. They were trying to perfect the democracy. We promise a Republican form of government in Article 4, Section 4, and you're trying to perfect that and make sure the country is living up to the true meaning of its creed. King kept talking about that. And because he was bringing that to the attention of the public, that there's something that the politicians are not doing that needs to be done, they couldn't have that out there. And that's why they're trying to misdirect the movement from inside the movement. And that's why they went there and joined it and trying to misdirect it and to make it inefficient so it cannot achieve its mission. Because they're not interested in perfecting anything here. If they were, they'd be helping Donald Trump. Do you see anybody up there? I'm not talking about these people that's speaking piecemeal about supporting Trump up to the level of having to do it before the public, because if they did not do it, the public would see it and want to know why. Both parties are talking the same way, so they have to split the conversation to make it appear that one party is against him, other party is in fact for him, when neither party is for this man. And you're going to see this coming up starting tomorrow. You know, they have a day off today because of King's birthday celebration. But wait until they begin to have the hearing in the Senate. And let's see if they have 4 members of the Senate, 4 Republicans in the Senate that will vote to have a majority. It takes 51 votes. A majority of members of the Senate. It would take 4 Republicans to join on, assuming all of the Democrats and the independent will vote for having more witnesses. And I have to tell you something, this is just for your eyes and ears only. There should not be any witnesses in the Senate. That's what I'm saying. And what are you scholars saying out there? You're saying, this is what you're saying. You're saying that, because you want to make it appear before the public that you're being even-handed, you're saying that they wouldn't let the president bring any witnesses and defend himself in the House. You don't understand the absurdity of that. You can't have any due process in an accusation. That's all the House does. It makes an accusation. And that is within the confines of Article 1, Section 2, Clause 5, when it says that the House shall have the sole power of impeachment. No one, not the Supreme Court, not the Chief Justice, and no one else can interfere with that claim. And and whatever claim is made in the House, if it's referred to the Senate, they cannot say, we don't want to hear it, and push it out of there either. Because their responsibility is in Article 1, Section 3, Clause 6. And in that particular part of the document, it is that they will hear, and in fact put on trial, the impeachment that's made in the House as the sole power to bring about impeachment. They have different responsibilities, and in that process, there's a check and balance system inside the process. That's all you need. And they have this idea that the Chief Justice sits there when the president is under duress because he's been impeached, that the Chief Justice sitting there as a single office holder of the court, sitting there as a referee. Did you hear the reading of Article 1, Section 3, Clause 6, where it says the Senate shall have the sole power to try impeachment? He's not sitting there as a referee of anything. He's sitting there because in the impeachment of the president, the Supreme Court Chief Justice is taking the place of the Vice President, and by taking the place of the Vice President, he then sits there in the stead of the Vice President. Why? Because the Vice President has a vested interest in the outcome if the President's the one on trial. Otherwise, the Vice President sits there in that seat. But he has a vested interest in the President's the one on trial, so therefore they put another officer, presiding officer in his place, and that's why the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is sitting there under Article 1, Section 3, Clause 6. And that is why Roberts will be sitting there, not because he knows anything. Roberts is just as ignorant as any of the others up there in Washington. You can put a black robe on, it doesn't increase your understanding of anything. They're just a men in black that Mark Levine is talking about. we want to do what King was doing. We want to perfect the American government, which is not all it needs to be and not all it can be and not all it will be if we do our part. And Dr. King was out there doing his part, and the next day, after going on top of that mountain the day before, the next day, King went on that mountaintop, and a sniper in that rooming house across from the Lorraine Hotel took King down off that mountain and placed him in the coffins of history and left the work that remained to be done as of April 4th, 1968 for us to do. And that's our job right now as we dedicate ourselves, hopefully, on King's birthday. We have work to do. It's not done, and the work to be done will never be done. It will always be something to do to perfect the country's democracy and the republic for which it stands. Okay, we got to get out of here. John's doing this again. That means that John's either trying to cut his throat or trying to throw me off the air. So I'll be back again next week. Want you, between now and then, to follow your dream. Because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.